Thank you. I'd like to call this meeting of Senate Finance to order. Mr. Thorley, will you please call the roll?
Senator Dennis. Here. Senator Keffer. Here. Senator Goycochea. Here. Senator Hammond. Here. Senator Ratty. Here. Senator Severs-Gansert. Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Dondero Loop. Here. Chair Brooks.
Here, thank you. And we can get started. I think that's everybody. We have three things on the agenda today. We have Senate Bill 439. We have Bdr Introductions, and then we have public comment. I'll start with Bdr Introductions. We've got two Bdrs in front of us. Bdr 1072, which revises the provisions relating to the Western Regional Education Compact. And then we have Bdr 1094 that revises provisions relating to deceptive trade practices. I would entertain a motion to introduce these two BDRs.
Move to introduce.
Senator Dennis moved to introduce. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Senator Dondero Loop. Any question on the motion?
Yeah, one question.
Yes, sir.
Where are those BDRs?
Right on my desk. I can make sure that you get a copy of those. All right. I'll give Senator Hammond a second to review before we move on from the motion. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. All opposed, nay. And the motion passes unanimously with the members present. And we can move on to our next agenda item. And our next agenda item is Senate Bill 439. It is a measure that revises provisions relating to education. It's an act relating to education, revising provisions relating to the Education Gift Fund, revising the sources of revenue for the State Education Fund, revising the method for determining the amount of and distributing money to support the operation of the public schools in the state, revising the method for providing additional money to support pupils with disabilities, transferring responsibility for apportioning money relating to the National School Lunch Program from the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Director of the State Department of Agriculture, eliminating requirements for the Department of Education to prepare and submit certain reports, eliminating certain accounts, and providing other matters properly related thereto. And tonight we have to present for us the Nevada Department of Education, and we have Superintendent Ebert, and it looks like Ms. Hartz. So Superintendent Ebert, if you want to, before we go on with that, I'm going to see if this is posted. We will have a mock-up of an amendment that resulted from this morning's subcommittee meeting, and that will be posted just momentarily, and we'll address that after we have the hearing on Senate Bill 439 as drafted. Superintendent Ebert, could you go right ahead?
Thank you, Chair Brooks. Vice Chair Dennis, for the record, my name is Joan Ebert. I serve as the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. As we all know, Senate Bill 543, passed by the 2019 legislature, laid the groundwork for the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan known as the PCFP and established the Commission on School Funding. The Commission on School Funding is a group of 11 experts on education and finance charged with making recommendations to the governor and legislature regarding K-12 funding. Its duties include recommending cost adjustments for each county as well as necessarily small school districts, reviewing per pupil funding amounts and recommending changes to create an optimal level of funding for public schools in Nevada. When recommending a change that would require more money to implement than was appropriated in the prior 2 years, identifying methods to fund the recommendation within 10 years, reviewing laws and regulations related to education and make recommendations for changes that would improve the public education system in Nevada. And finally, providing guidance, monitoring, and making recommendations to improve the implementation of the PCFP by the Nevada Department of Education, school districts, and charter schools. The commission met 22 times since September 2019 to meet its charge. I want to take this opportunity in public space to thank the commission members for their tireless efforts to undertake the work that is incredibly complex and challenging. I appreciate their commitment to the guiding principles of equity, transparency, accountability, and flexibility. In all of their conversations, students have been their first priority. The commission members were supported throughout their work by the Nevada Department of Education staff, as well as subject matter experts from APA, Applied Analysis, and WestEd. In addition to regular open meetings at which public comment was accepted in accordance with open meeting law, the commission held 2 afternoon sessions dedicated exclusively to public comment. One related to the weights for categories of pupils, the other focused on defining optimal funding. In alignment with the requirements of SB 543, the commission submitted its first set of recommendations regarding the implementation of the PCFP to the governor and the legislature in July of 2020. Those recommendations included redefining at-risk students, removing special education from the weighted funding, promoting flexibility and alignment in reporting, expanding the hold harmless provision to include charter schools and the university schools for profoundly gifted pupils. The PCFP seeks to provide all students with a base level of resources and to provide greater support to those who need it. In addition, for the first time ever, Nevada's education funding formula accounts for the adjusted costs of providing education in urban, rural, and large urban small school districts and school settings across the state. The PCFP is not a reconfiguration of the Nevada plan. It is a brand new approach to funding K-12 education in Nevada. Rather than asking public schools and districts to cobble together budgets through categorical and competitive grants, the PCFP provides a systematic and flexible approach to K-12 education funding that promotes equitable access to high-quality education opportunities for all students. Under the Nevada plan, a limited statewide education allocation was divided and reallocated as necessary to determine the per pupil funding amount. Through the PCFP, a statewide base per pupil amount is determined and then funding is added to account for regional cost adjustments and student characteristics. The Nevada plan has been funded based on prior year's expenditures. The PCFP is funded based on available state and local revenues dedicated to education and combined into a single transparent account. This work is difficult, but it couldn't be more important than it at this moment where we are currently redesigning the future of education. The fact that it is a 54-year-old Nevada plan no longer works for Nevada students and schools. The Nevada plan has never been flexible enough to accommodate changes in demographics, in circumstances, which has forced policymakers to add grant programs and to funding streams to make up shortcomings. This evening, we have the opportunity to review Senate Bill 439, which presents revisions to statute to support the successful implementation of the pupil-centered funding plan. As I proceed through SB 439, you will see the parallels to the discussion this morning and during the budget closings. Section 1 allows interest and income to be earned on the education gift fund and allows funding in the education gift fund to balance forward to future fiscal years. Section 2, subsection 1 clarifies that interest and income earned on general fund revenue will not be transferred to the state education fund, which here on out, we like using acronyms, so I will say SEF for State Education Fund. Subsection 2 adds additional revenue sources found within existing statute, which will be allocated through the PCFP, including revenue received through abandoned gift certificates, which will be transferred to the CEF. Net proceed of minerals, NRS 387.195, paragraph D of subsection 6 of NRS 278C.250 for the support of public schools within a county school district pursuant to NRS must be allocated to, and when collected, must be paid into the appropriate fund, that taxing agency. Administrative fines collected by the State Environmental Commission will be transferred to the School Education Fund. And finally, 50% of the boat registration fees collected by the Department of Wildlife will be transferred to the School Education Fund. Subsection 5 removes the superintendent's authority to establish other accounts within the SEF, specifically federal funds, and this change impacts additional sections within the bill. Section 3 makes conforming changes from Section 2. Section 4, subsection 2, also removes the State Board of Education and the Nevada Department of Education from the allocation of funding through the pupil-centered funding model. This ensures that the Nevada Department of Education budgets are built in alignment with the state budget instructions for all executive branch agencies. Subsection 2 removes pupils with disabilities from the additional weighted funding portion of the PCFP model. The Commission on School Funding recommended that the SGF revenues for special education services funded outside of the model. Subsection 3 removes the adjustment for necessarily small schools and changes the name of the adjustment for the small district equity adjustment to district equity adjustment. The Commission on School Funding recommended that these adjustments be consolidated into a single adjustment. Subsection 5, with the implementation of the pupil-centered funding plan, makes students eligible for services through more than one weighted category, receiving the funding for the highest, students that qualify for more than one category will receive the highest weight within the waterfall. This section is revised to include funding for special education services. Additionally, changes are made to reflect the revision included in Section 2 regarding federal funds. Section 6, subsection 1, clarifies that interest and income earned on general fund revenue will not be transferred to the state education fund. Subsections 1, 2, and 5 remove language that is specific to the development of the Nevada plan and the corresponding equity allocation model. Subsection 3 adds clarifying language regarding the state funding for people with disabilities. Moving on, Section 7 renumbers the statute there related to the determination of statewide base for pupil funding. Section 9, subsections 1 and 2 edit language and also the remuneration to align with with Section 2. Section 10 incorporates changes made in Section 4 by renumbering the sections of the statute and shifts the tier level references because the NDE, the Nevada Department of Education, is removed as a tier A. Section 11 incorporates changes made by Section 4, also removes references to NDE. Section 12 clarifies that monthly payments from NDE do not include the National School Lunch Program matching funds as well as possible withholdings. Section 13, subsection 1, removes the reference to the necessarily small school adjustment. And subsection adds clarifying language regarding weighted funding. Funding will be allocated to where the student is estimated to be enrolled. Subsection 4 incorporates changes made to Section 8 of the bill by clarifying that money received from the statewide multiplier for special education must be separately accounted for by each school district. Section 14 and 15 incorporate changes made from previous sections of the bill. Section 16, subsections 1 and 3, removes the average school report based on the governor's recommended budget and legislatively approved budget. Subsection 2 eliminates the requirement that the school-specific report be provided in paper copy to the parents, legal guardians of each pupil who attends the school, allows for posting of the internet site, allows the posting to an internet site and is maintained by the school district. Section 17 makes conforming changes regarding the transfer of the school lunch match from NDE to the Department of Agriculture. These changes include allowing the director of the Department of Agriculture to process monthly apportionments for state match, as well as withhold payment under certain circumstances. This is similar to the authority granted to the Superintendent of Public Instruction related to other payments to public schools. Section 18 changes the dates by which NDE, and this was done with consultation from LCB and GFO, that we must develop the recommendations for the minimum expenditure amounts for textbooks, instructional supplies, instructional software, and instructional hardware. It also allows NDE to provide these recommendations once each biennium rather than each fiscal year. Section 19 adds language to indicate that the report prepared by NDE identifying school districts, charter schools, and university schools that did not meet their MER recommendation in a fiscal year will be posted to the NDE website. Section 21 eliminates the bullying prevention account and the awarding of grants throughout the account. Section 23 renames the contingency account for special education services to the account for state special education services. This account will include all general fund appropriation for the provision of special education services. It also included conforming language regarding the statewide multiplier for pupils with disabilities. Section 24 incorporates changes made in Section 9 of this bill related to the apportionments for profoundly gifted students, pupils enrolled part-time in a program of distance education and charter schools. Section 25 eliminates the account for instruction in financial literacy. Section 26 incorporates changes made in Section 9 of this bill related to the profoundly gifted students and pupils enrolled part-time in a program of distance education. Section 27 eliminates reference to grant funds previously provided to school districts, charter schools for the reimbursement of coursework completed by teachers related to computer literacy and computer science. Section 28 removes the requirement for the State Board of Education to prescribe priorities for the regional professional development training programs. Section 29 eliminates NSHE's ability to award funding previously granted for courses completed related to financial literacy. Section 30 eliminates the opportunity for NSHE to apply for grants funded through the account for computer education and technology. This account was repealed in Section 39 of this bill. Section 31 transfers proceeds from abandoned gift certificates to the State Education Fund. Section 33 transfers funds collected for violations in the prevention, abatement, or control of air pollution to the State Education Fund. Section 36 repeals sections of statute related to emergency financial assistance for school districts, account for programs for innovation and the prevention of remediation, account for the new Nevada Education Funding Plan, net proceeds of minerals, state supplemental school account, teacher school supplies assistance account, waivers related to the minimum expenditure requirements for school districts and charter schools. Section 37 allows LCB staff to make corresponding changes to NRS and NAC. Section 38 accounts for unexpended balances at the end of fiscal year 2021 for certain accounts. Section 39 repeals section of the statutes. Section 40 provides for the effective dates of each section of this bill. And I believe that takes us through those majority of those changes. I would like to close by saying that this work would not be possible without the dedication of the Commission and the staff here at the Department of Education, GFO, and LCB. When I returned home 2 years ago in the middle of the legislative session, I knew we were embarking on a new and revisited formula that has been in place for 50 years. I am blessed to be surrounded by trailblazers. Specifically, I want to call out our Deputy of Business and Support Services, Heidi Hartz, for leading in this work and working very closely with the Commission on school funding. Her teammates, James Kirkpatrick and Bo Bennett, for making the Commission's recommendations and the legislation in front of you to reality. And finally, a huge thanks to our Chief Strategy Officer, Jessica Todman, who has been the glue that has pulled a lot of this work together. I thank all of you for your leadership, those of you that were here during the last session, as well as you being here for the 81st session, and this team stands ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Superintendent Ebert. Do we have, well, before I open up to questions, I just want to say that as somebody whose parents went to every year of their schooling under the Nevada, well, almost all their schooling under the Nevada plan. I went to all my schooling under the Nevada plan. My kids went to school under the Nevada plan, and now I have grandkids that are still going to school under the Nevada plan. That it is nice to see that we are completing the work to modernize our funding formula now that the plan that just no longer works for the majority of the kids in the state of Nevada. And so getting one step closer by watching these pieces of this plan be implemented through this piece of legislation is exciting. And so I want to turn that over to anyone in the committee who has any questions for Superintendent Ebert. All right. We do not have any. Senator Dondarrow-Loop.
Thank you very much, Chair Brooks. I really just wanted to say, as somebody whose father, I'm sure, was in charge of the Nevada plan, and I've lived under it myself, and I know I've been here around 15 superintendents in the Clark County School District in my lifetime, so we're happy you're here, Superintendent Ebert. Thank you for your leadership as well. As we are going through this, and it was a little bit of an overload, right? As we're going through, I wanted to know Section 2, subsection 1, where it talks about the interest and income earned on the money in the fund, excluding the direct legislative appropriation from the state general fund required by subsection 3, must, after deducting any applicable charges, to be credited to the fund. Could you just give us a little cliff notes on that, please? Thank you.
For the record, Heidi Hartz, I serve as the Deputy Superintendent for Business and Support Services. This language is intended to address some concerns that were previously raised by the State Treasurer, in that the original legislation from 2019 indicated that all revenue in the State Education Fund that earned interest and income would be retained within the State Education Fund. The State Treasurer's Office was concerned that interest and income earned on general funds are often invested in other areas within the executive budget. And so they wanted clarifying language that would indicate that general fund appropriation and interest and income earnings would not be reflected in the funds available through the state education fund.
Thank you very much. That helped. Thank you.
Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Superintendent, I just have one question. I think it's Section 4, actually, Subsection 5D, where you talk a little bit about the weights and you talk about the eligibility for those who might fit into several categories. Can you just go through again what the intent is here? Because originally we were told that eventually we would like to get to the point where if you're eligible for more than one bucket of money, more than one of those weights, that you'd get all that funding. But there's an intent here. Can you kind of give me the backstory on making sure that they're eligible for just the highest one according to this language, and then what the next step would be, I guess?
Heidi Hartz for the record. Senate Bill 543 from the 2019 legislative session indicated the intent that students would receive the weighted funding category for the category with the highest multiplier for which they belong. So there's no change to that methodology reflected within this BDR, within this bill.
Thank you. I guess what I'm getting at is it's still the intent, though, that eventually when there's enough money there, that those who are eligible for all those weights would then be given that money as well. And I just want to make sure that doesn't change, if that's my understanding, if that's correct.
Heidi Hartz for the record. I do not believe at this point in time there is anything in the legislation that would support that concept. I would note, however, that the Commission on School Funding has opportunities to make recommendations in each interim moving forward. Similarly, the Legislative Committee on Education, the Governor, and the Legislature have the opportunity to make recommendations for further revisions to the People-Centered Funding Plan as we move forward.
Okay, I think that answers my question. So basically, this is the way it is, and there's no thought right now as to what we do in the future, but it would be left up to those later on to make those decisions. Because I mean, you're right, may not have been in here, but I think the intent was, or was spoken at some point, to make sure that those who were eligible for other weights, that they would be able to get those as well. That's the way I read it, or the way I understood it a couple years ago. So. But I think that answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Dennis?
I just wanted to give some historical, since I worked on the bill. When we had that discussion about the multiple weights, we talked about it at some point, but we made the decision that I guess at some point in the future, you could have that discussion to see if you're going to have multiple weights. But when you looked at the actual numbers, it would be, I mean, we'd have to have a lot more money in the thing in order to fully fund the weights. And even as is right now, to get to the full fund, it's going to take several years. And so that's something that future legislatures will have to have a discussion on as the funding for education increases.
Thank you for the historical context. Do we have any other questions? Senator Sievers-Gansert?
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I have a couple of questions. So first, Section 35, the language has changed from budgeted to actual when it talks about ending fund balances over 16.6%. So I was just trying to figure out why the change and if the timing has changed, maybe of when budgets are due.
Heidi Hartz for the record. The proposed language in Section 35 does change the existing language from the budgeted expenditures to the actual expenditures. And so that aligns the ending fund balance to the expenses that were incurred during the fiscal year, understanding that budgets can change over the course of each fiscal year. And no, there's no change to the timeframes by which districts are to prepare or submit their budgets.
You cut out a little bit at the end, if you don't mind repeating.
Heidi Hartz for the record. This bill does not include any revisions to timeframes which school districts are to submit their budgets.
Okay. Thank you. And then I had another question around, on Section 5, when it talks about the small, or the regulation for the district equity adjustment, and that it's supposed to be based on where relatively fewer pupils are enrolled. So I haven't seen any details on how those numbers were devised exactly. I've seen a spreadsheet with some different numbers, but I didn't know how you actually formulated those numbers. I don't know if you can share that information with us.
Heidi Hartz, for the record. The Commission on School Funding worked with APA to review the two adjustments included in Senate Bill 543, which would have included this necessarily small schools adjustment and the small district equity adjustment. In reviewing those adjustments, the subject matter experts provided an opportunity for the Commission on School Funding to consider consolidating those adjustments into a single adjustment. The net result was very similar in nature, and they felt that it created more transparency in these adjustments within the pupil-centered funding plan, making it easier not only to run the model, but also to explain to the public how these adjustments are implemented. The Commission on School Funding did adopt a recommendation that these two adjustments be consolidated into the district size adjustment, which is based on attendance area data. And that recommendation was included in the governor's recommended budget.
Thank you. And if I can follow up, so I haven't been able to see the formula that's been used. So I guess I'm looking to dig a little deeper to figure out exactly how they came up with the numbers that will be applied. And then to follow up on that, when you think of small attendance areas, I also think about charter schools, because we have so many charter school students now, but they're distributed everywhere, right? And so why those were not taken into consideration. But so it's the formula itself, and then charter schools and why they were left out of that formula. Thank you.
Heidi Hartz, for the record. I would indicate that the department has shared with LCB Fiscal Analysis Division staff information provided by developed by the Commission on School Funding and also developed by the subject matter experts. So they should be able to share that with you. If it's insufficient, we'd be happy to provide additional information. Additionally, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division staff do have the actual models for the pupil-centered funding plan where that calculation is included. I would note that charter schools are not eligible to receive the district size adjustment. That is a requirement currently included within the enabling legislation. So in Senate Bill 543, approved during the 2019 session, when identifying the funding available for charter schools and how the adjusted base per pupil funding amount is to be calculated, the legislation indicates that the statewide base per pupil funding amount is to be paid to charter schools who provide full-time programs of distance education to students, and then the adjusted base per pupil for all other students, those attending a brick and mortar school, and the adjusted base per pupil funding amount for a charter school is to apply the cost of education index to the statewide base per pupil funding amount. The legislation does not currently include an adjustment based on school size.
Thank you.
Senator Rondero-Loop.
Thank you very much for a second chance here. Can you talk to me a little bit about section 20 at the bottom of page 33 and the top of 34, where it deletes those expenditures and revenues based on merit, salary increase, and cost of living adjustments? And can you just tell me, like, the rationale behind that and how that came about?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. The section of the bill that you are referencing pertains to language that's recommended for removal from statute. Those adjustments are part of the calculations used for the Nevada plan. Those calculations are not part of the pupil-centered funding plan. The primary difference is because the Nevada plan is an expenditure-driven model and methodology, while the pupil-centered funding plan is a revenue-driven methodology. Therefore, when allocating revenues through the pupil-centered funding plan, it is not necessary to calculate adjustments specific to the anticipated traditional growth in salary increases or in the benefit increases as employees move across the pay scale or school districts provide higher rates or costs related to benefits for their employees.
Thank you very much. That helps.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have any other questions from the committee? Senator Kiekeffer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Can we get back to special ed really quick, which I think starts in section 5, if I jotted that down correctly, maybe section 6. So we're carving it out of the weight, consistent with what we did this morning. So where in the process does the funding come in? As we run the model, is special ed funding carved out of the pool from the education funding account, or is it a separate allocation based on the amendments being made in the bill?
Heidi Hartz for the record. Special education is funded through 3 distinct pots of funding. We have the federal funds, which are not funded through the pupil-centered funding plan or the state education funding plan. They will continue to be allocated to separate budget accounts within the Department of Education. Similarly, the state's general fund dollars that are intended for maintenance of effort requirements for the federal funds are not allocated through the pupil-centered funding plan or the state education fund. They would be allocated in the manner that they're currently allocated, and based on the conversations this morning in the subcommittee closing, all of those funds would be brought together into a single budget account so that we could track all of the funds, the state general funds for special education. The third pot of money that supports special education services across the state is a local contribution for each county school district. And the amount of funding that is expended from one year to the next and represents the maintenance of effort requirement for each school district is unique to that school district and would be funded through their adjusted base per pupil funding amount. The reason that the Commission on School Funding and in turn the governor's recommended budget have recommended that the state general fund dollars not be allocated through the pupil-centered funding plan is it would make it very difficult to be able to ensure that the state could meet the maintenance of effort requirement from one year to the next, understanding that as the statewide base per pupil funding amount increases, the weight would increase as well. Therefore, the maintenance of effort requirement for the state would be increasing just about every fiscal year. Additionally, the funding for the local contributions is currently recommended to be paid by school districts through their adjusted base per pupil funding amount, again, in recognition that each school district expends a different amount of money for each student based on the needs of the individual students as well as the students within their districts who are eligible to receive additional supports and services specific to special education.
Appreciate that. So I had thought that the Commission on School Funding had suggested that the special education allocation be made after the, through the state education fund after the base per pupil amount was determined. Am I just not getting that right?
Heidi Hartz for the record. The Commission on School Funding did ultimately make that recommendation. However, that was after the legislative session had already begun. And so there was not a clear mechanism to provide that information or to validate the fiscal impact of making that change.
So if we start the way that it's included in the governor's proposal and what we approved this morning, would it prevent us from changing back in future years? Would there be maintenance of effort implications long term?
Heidi Hartz for the record. The Commission on School Funding has a responsibility identified in statute to monitor the implementation of the pupil-centered funding plan and to provide recommendations to the Legislative Committee on Education, who in turn would provide those recommendations with or without additional support and guidance to the governor and the legislature. Additionally, the governor and the legislature also would have the authority to make changes to any component of the pupil-centered funding plan as we move forward.
Okay. On a different subject, you mentioned the minimum expenditure requirement for textbooks and school supplies a couple times, but I got lost. I think it was in section 16. Is that the struck language in sections, or when we're striking section 1? I guess section 1, or is that a different piece? I've sort of lost track of our MER requirements because we've changed them a couple times in recent years.
Heidi Hartz for the record. Based on the enabling legislation included in Senate Bill 543 from the 2019 legislative session, the minimum expenditure requirement will become a minimum expenditure recommendation beginning in fiscal year 2022. This bill proposes that the date by which the Department of Education, in collaboration with the Governor's Finance Office and the Legislative Council Bureau's Fiscal Analysis Division, develop that calculation would be pushed out so that we have more time to prepare that calculation and provide it to the school districts. I would note again that this is a recommendation, it is not a requirement. Senate Bill 543 also requires the Department of Education to develop a report each year identifying school districts that did not meet the minimum expenditure recommendation for the previous fiscal year. And this bill includes a revision to the language that would indicate that that report prepared by the Department of Education would be posted to the Department of Education's website.
I apologize, that was in section 18. I got the section wrong. And then I think, so we had also, the Commission on School Funding had also recommended the inclusion of charters in the hold harmless provisions, and we included that this morning. Would that be an appropriate amendment to have in this bill since the legislature is moving down that path, funding-wise?
Heidi Hartz for the record. It does appear that that revision to statute would be appropriate, so that there is no confusion moving forward with what entities are included in the hold harmless provision.
Okay, I appreciate that. And my final question relates to a subject that I brought up during the Finance Committee hearing this morning, or the subcommittee hearing this morning, relating to proportionality between base and weights. And considering I wasn't asking you questions this morning, and you're on the mic now, Ms. Hartz, if you look at section 5, subsection, or section 4, subsection 5 of the bill, it talks about how the funding implications for base and weights should be proportional, whether there's a decrease in funding that requires a decrease in weights, that a proportional amount of decrease be taken by the base. And then if you look at the top of page 11, for example, in paragraph C, that if the multipliers for all categories of pupils in a fiscal year are increased from the immediately preceding fiscal year, that there's a proportional increase considered for the statewide base per pupil funding amount. And so I know, I'm sure you heard, we're listening this morning. Do you disagree with how I interpret that?
Heidi Hartz for the record. As LCB Fiscal Analysis Division staff testified this morning, the legislature does have some latitude with establishing the statewide base per pupil funding amount, as well as the weighted funding in fiscal year 2022, because that will be the first year of implementation. The model is intended that in the concept, my understanding is that in the first year of implementation, the intent was that all funds would be used to maximize the statewide base per pupil funding amount while maintaining historical funding for the weights. That being said, as your staff indicated this morning, the legislature does have some latitude in the first year of implementation. So if the legislature, for example, were to want to increase funding for the weights, then that would result in perhaps additional funds being allocated through the pupil-centered funding plan that would be targeted specifically to the weights to support that policy decision, rather than increasing the statewide base per pupil funding amount.
So in subsequent years, how would you interpret that paragraph?
So Heidi Hartz, for the record. In subsequent biennia, as the budget is built, then the parameters that exist within statute that identify the governor's option for adjusting funding for the pupil-centered funding plan based on economic forum projections or other alternatives recommended by the governor would tie to and build off of the baseline that's established in fiscal year 2022.
I agree. Certainly, I agree with that. But so if we were to appropriate money that increased the weights, would we then also consider a proportional increase for the base based on that? I mean, look, we can always change it, right? The governor can recommend something different. We can do something different. But I think the intent of the statute is that they move up or down together.
Heidi Hartz, for the record. That appears to be the intent of the enabling legislation, that if there is to be, for example, an increase in funding allocated to the pupil-centered funding plan, let me back that up. So once we move forward with implementation, if there's additional funding available beyond the prescribed adjustments for the statewide base per pupil funding amount, which would be the rate of inflation and the costs associated with enrollment growth. The funding then flows through the waterfall of the pupil-centered funding plan and would go to the weighted funding. If there is funding that remains unallocated or unobligated as the funding flows through the waterfall, it would be invested in increasing the funding available in the 3 weighted categories until such time as the targeted weights have been achieved. Once the targeted weights have been achieved, then those unobligated funds would be reinvested proportionally in the statewide base per pupil funding amount, as well as within the weights. If there were to be a reduction in funding available for allocation through the pupil-centered funding plan, then the enabling legislation does indicate that the reduction should be proportionally applied to the statewide base per pupil funding amount and to the weights. But to your point, yes, the governor and the legislature can make recommendations that would modify what is currently included in the enabling legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Hartz.
Thank you. That brought up a question. So I know that in the commission recommendation, as well as the decisions made by the legislature and the subcommittees, that the hold harmless applied to charter schools as well. And do we, since that might not, I don't think that was envisioned in Senate Bill 543, either intentionally or unintentionally, do we have, it's not addressed in this bill, does that mean we need a piece of legislation to codify that decision, those decisions made by the subcommittee if accepted by the full committee?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. Within the provisions of Senate Bill 543, the language that pertains to what is being referred to as the hold harmless provision is part of the legislature's intent for the implementation of the bill. With respect to whether additional legislation or an amendment would be required, I would defer to LCB staff.
Thank you, Ms. Hartz. And I don't know if that's something you could address, Mr. Thorley.
Wayne Thorley, for the record, LCB Fiscal. It's something that staff would need to reach out to LCB Legal to discuss. This morning, the K-12 Higher Education CIP Subcommittee did vote to recommend that charter schools and university schools for profoundly gifted pupils be included in the hold harmless calculation. But I'll reach out to legal and legal counsel and get their opinion.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions from the committee? Senator Sievers-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. Sort of along the same lines, we also made a decision about the hold harmless being per pupil as far as the way that's run. And so I guess that would be a question too, whether we need to put that in legislation as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll reach out and see if that's something that has to be included in this or another bill or an amendment to this bill. Do we have any other questions from the committee? Speaking of amendments, I hear that NDE has a proposed amendment, and would you like to introduce us to that concept and we can have a discussion about that?
Heidi Hartz, for the record, could you clarify, are you talking about the mock-up that is posted on the website?
Is the mock-up that's posted on the website that was created by our legal drafting team, is that reflective of the amendment that NDE was going to propose to Senate Bill 429?
So Heidi Hartz, for the record, the amendment that is provided on the website, that is the mock-up, is reflective of action taken this morning in the subcommittees that would allow that the funding in the state education fund to remain in the fund for the biennium and be transferred into the education stabilization account at the end of each biennium rather than at the end of each fiscal year. Additionally, the Department of Education has identified, working collaboratively with the Commission on School Funding as well as the Governor's Finance Office and LCB staff, that currently the enabling legislation that pertains to the Education Stabilization Account indicates that the only time the Department of Education could access the Education Stabilization Account would be in the event that revenues are being earned at 97% or less than the legislatively authorized amount. And that would require a resolution by the Interim Finance Committee. There's currently no provision that would provide the Department of Education with an opportunity to receive additional funds in the event that enrollment growth is higher than anticipated in the legislatively approved budget and revenues are not earned in a similar fashion above and beyond what is included in the legislatively approved budget. So the department would offer to the committee, I guess for input, whether you would be willing to accept an amendment that would allow us to amend NRS 387.1213 to allow the Department of Education to request a transfer from the Education Stabilization Account in the event that enrollment growth exceeded the legislatively approved budget and revenues being earned in the state education fund were insufficient to meet that unexpected and additional expense.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee on that proposed amendment? Senator Kieckhofer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that would have the effect of basically offsetting the need for a supplemental appropriation when we walk into a legislative session?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. It could theoretically offset the need for a supplemental appropriation from a legislative session, presuming that there are sufficient funds available in the Education Stabilization Account to meet that unexpected expense.
Right. Thank you. So, but it's ultimately serving that role to allow for this transfer based on enrollment growth. If there's expenses that are higher than anticipated, it's sort of the other side of the coin versus revenues coming in lower, right?
Heidi Hartz, for the record, yes, that is correct.
And so do we have any more questions from the committee for the Department of Education on either Senate Bill 439, I misspoke earlier, it's 439, sorry, and or the proposed conceptual amendment that was just described to us? All right, so I just want to remind everyone, all the committee members, that if you go to Nellis under the link for, or the link for tonight's meeting, under exhibits, there is a Senate Bill 3386 V1 mock-up of the amendment that we were referencing. And so if I want to give the committee just a minute to look at that proposed mock-up amendment and see if we have any further questions. And it was described briefly by Ms. Hartz, and as well as NDE's additional proposed conceptual amendment. So if the committee could just take a moment to look at that, and if we have any questions, I think that Mr. Thorley could walk us through that amendment. All right. Actually, Mr. Thorley, I don't think we need to do that. It's a very simple amendment, and Ms. Hart's described it pretty detailed. All right. So, any other questions from the committee for Department of Education or on the amendment on Senate Bill 439 or on the proposed amendment? All right. I do not see any. So thank you very much, Superintendent Ebert and Ms. Hartz. And now we can go to testimony on Senate Bill 439 as well as the proposed amendments to Senate Bill 439. And do we have anyone in support for Senate Bill 439 in the audience here today? Welcome, Mr. Keating.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Brad Keating, for the record, representing the Clark County School District, testifying in support of Senate Bill 439. Wanted to provide comment as it relates to the pupil-centered funding plan, which has been discussed at great length this evening. CCSD supports the new funding formula, which holds as its core a pupil-centered approach, which, as proposed and passed by this body in 2019, addresses the need of every student throughout the state. CCSD would like to urge the legislature to continue following the recommendations of the Commission on School Funding, who have been working on this historic formula for the past 18 months. This panel, with experience in education and school finance, has been working tirelessly to ensure every weight and aspect of this formula meets the needs of our state's school districts. CCSD looks forward to being included in the additional conversations moving forward on Senate Bill 439. CCSD has a vested interest regarding the formula that supports students with disabilities and participating in that process to ensure all students receive funding, both appropriately as well as in a fair and equitable manner. This is an issue for all school districts, but of utmost importance to the Clark County School District. Our district is appreciative of the conversation and dialogue this evening, supports SB 439. We look forward to working with the legislature over the next few weeks as the implementation of this funding formula develops and helps to ensure that the final outcome provides equity and adequacy for all students throughout the state of Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have anyone else in the audience in support of SB 439? All right, broadcast, if we could go to the phones and see if we have anyone in support of Senate Bill 439.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. To testify in support on Senate Bill 439, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 687, Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Marie Nisus, Marieneissess, President of CCEA. For years, the Nevada K-12 education system has been underfunded. In Clark County, educators have always tried to do their best with the resources available to provide their students the best quality education possible. However, year after year, our educators have seen the lack of funding has negatively impacted their students' education. The pandemic brought these issues to the forefront by spotlighting students' dismal learning conditions, including the lack of resources, textbooks, and the largest class sizes in the nation. When I became president of CCEA, I did not know that we would transition to a distance learning model overnight, but we did, and our educators deserve to be recognized. The best recognition we can give our educators is an investment in their students' education. The investment comes with full implementation of SB 543 through SB 439. CCA and I are in support of full implementation of SB 543 through Senate Bill 439. It is time to fund education to bring Nevada in line with the national average by creating and increasing the base pupil funding to ensure equity for all students. Though we appreciate the intent behind the Zoom and Victory schools, the particular services provided by those schools must be provided to every qualifying LEP student throughout the state. As you will see in the CCA provided exhibit on Zoom schools, CCSD does not provide services to 81.1% of our limited English proficient students. These students will qualify under the pupil-centered funding plan for Zoom services. Currently, Zoom schools are only able to serve 18.9% of eligible LEP populations district-wide. Creating a base pupil funding amount with weights for things like at-risk and EL allows money to follow the student, allowing every school to ensure equity for students throughout Clark County rather than the mere 38 schools. SB 439 is a step in the right direction, but Nevada will continue to fail students and families should we not find and earmark additional revenue to fully fund the pupil-centered funding plan, according to the Commission on Schools Funding recommendations. It is one thing to make Zoom services available and accessible to every qualifying student. However, we will not reach the national average without fully funding the base. In my experience as a classroom educator at a Title I school, I learned firsthand that an investment in our students would lead to a better educational outcomes. However, our educators can only invest so much of their personal funds to ensure their classroom has the resources their students need to learn and grow educationally. Additional funding will also help reduce class sizes and make Zoom and Victory services available to all schools. Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 424. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Carl Bird, Karlbyrd, and I'm a social studies teacher at Cale Knutson Middle School in Las Vegas, Nevada. Despite class size reduction laws going back to 1989, Nevada has the largest class sizes in the nation. 9 in 10 students have a class size above the recommended levels in the state, and CCSD estimates that 32,000 students are without a full-time educator. A recent Las Vegas Sun article noted that a bold post-pandemic plan for revitalizing the economy includes transforming the infrastructure of our state and attracting new industries moving beyond just relying on gaming, tourism, and mining. This is the ticket to greater future stability in the state of Nevada. Those industries want an educated workforce, and we have the mechanism in place to secure this goal. The 2019 Nevada Legislature passed SB 543 last session with the intention to fund the public-centered funding plan in the 2021 legislative session. To date, no additional significant revenue has been proposed by the Nevada Legislature to fund SB 543 and the pupil-centered funding plan. Optimal funding would allow for more teachers to be hired, thus reducing class sizes, allowing students to receive more individualized attention and interact more with the teacher. Additionally, teachers will have more flexibility to use different instructional approaches, which will result in greater student participation, student feedback, and a greater chance for academic achievement. Overall, research shows that students in smaller classes perform better in all subjects and on all assessments when compared to their peers in larger classes. Class size reduction has always been popular by candidates running for office, and then after they are elected, they seem to run from the issue. Nevada lawmakers must act boldly and commit additional revenue toward education this legislative session. No more excuses and no more delays. No more telling the nation that we enjoy a last place ranking on education. It's time to fully fund our schools, and SB 439 is a step in the right direction. I urge you to pass this funding mechanism for our students. If you will not act boldly for the education of Nevada children, then Nevada voters will do so in 2022. Respectfully, thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 774. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits, 774. You are unmuted. Please proceed with your support testimony. Please ensure that your telephone is not muted as well on your end. Caller, we will return to you. I will move to the next caller. Caller with the last three digits, 205. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Jessica Jones, Jessica Jones. Good evening, Chairman Brooks and members of the committee. I'm a kindergarten teacher at Hickey Elementary School, which is a Title I school on the east side of Las Vegas. Education has historically been significantly underfunded in our state. And while we've seen a lot of progress to address this in previous sessions, more needs to be done to make that happen. For far too long, the Nevada plan has shortchanged the students in Clark County. In the last 50 years, we've seen the demographics in Clark County include more students that require special education services, more English language learners, and now there's more students living in poverty too. These students need additional support that this bill provides in order for them to get the quality education they deserve. As an educator who teaches on the east side of Las Vegas in the Clark County School District, I see firsthand the needs and support that these students require in order to be successful in the classroom. While SB 543, the new pupil-centered funding plan that passed last session, was a move in the right direction, it came with no additional revenue sources to fund that plan. One of the major things we need is additional revenue to fully fund this plan. The voters next fall will have the opportunity to make that happen. This bill is not the final path to get true equity here in Nevada, but it continues on that path in order to better educate all of our students. It's for those reasons I'm in support of SB 439 as a step towards the full implementation of SB 543. The children can't wait any longer for the resources and funding that they need, so we must go full steam ahead for the children. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 496. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Robert Hollowood, Robert Hollowwood, and I'm an educator at State and Elementary School. I teach kindergarten through 5th grade as a science specialist. Hello, and thank you, Committee Chair Brooks and committee members. I'm a member of the Clark County Education Association. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the public education system experienced massive disruption. During my 21 years with Clark County School District, we've been consistently asked to make do with the funding we have. I think we've done a remarkable job of it considering the circumstances. But the pandemic laid that bare. We were entirely unprepared for the challenge that virtual learning would present, and had neither the training for this contingency nor the personnel and resources to do it well. I don't blame the Clark County School District for this. In private industry, there are business continuity plans to handle this sort of delivery interruption. The district doesn't have funding for necessities like class size reduction or adequate wraparound services for students, much less luxuries like a continuity plan. The end result is already difficult learning conditions being exacerbated, amounting to a lost year of education. As you consider SB 439, the technical challenges to implement SB 543, please consider that a course must be set to optimally fund the new pupil-centered funding plan. I'm in support of the full implementation of SB 543 through SB 439. We must leave behind the times of categorical funding and opt for money that follows our pupils so struggling students can get the individualized attention all learners deserve. Nevada schools need to have per pupil funding that brings us in line with the national average as we were in the 1980s and 1990s, and in the 2-decade race to the bottom of education funding. We need to increase funding for services that have reached less than 10% of Clark County students through the Zoom Schools program, as well as target those monies to the student populations in need of those services. In short, successful implementation of this new funding formula is an opportunity to end the roller coaster of school funding across the state and achieve equity at each school. SB 543 was passed during the 2019 legislative session as a vehicle for more equitable and stable education funding for counties across Nevada, replacing the more than 50-year-old Nevada plan. I'm in strong support of funding the pupil-centered funding formula as intended by the legislators who wrote and passed the bill in 2019. The time has come for legislators to lead as they were elected to do. Without generating new streams of revenue like the adjustment of property tax rates, raising mining taxes, or increasing gaming or sales tax, we cannot expect to see improvement. That being said, we can no longer be reliant solely on the fragile gaming and sales tax streams that dive dramatically when there's an economic downturn, or be reliant on one-time federal monies to continue to make do. Thank you for passing SB 543 and discussing SB 349 today. But we need your help to provide the resources our students and teachers need in the school environment. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 927. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Hava Ahmed, Hawah, AHMAD, and I'm reading testimony for an educator who could not be here today, and it's just an excerpt. So I encourage everyone to go online and look at the exhibits to read the full testimony. Hello, and thank you, Committee Chair Brooks and committee members. My name is Jennifer Sykes, and I am a teacher at Bob Miller Middle School and teach 6th through 8th grade art and TV production. I'm a member of the Clark County Education Association. I am in support of the full implementation of SB 543, the People-Centered Funding Plan. It is time for Nevada to live up to its potential. The growth that Nevada has experienced is a tremendous opportunity for our schools to increase per-pupil funding. Improved learning conditions are a direct correlation to per-pupil funding. So many schools and programs are stretched beyond their limits. Nevada schools show tremendous growth when they were finally funded with nationally comparable per-pupil funding. Proven programs and resources need proper funding. SB 439 is the next step towards fully implementing SB 543. Now it is the time for lawmakers to step up and commit to funding it. I, along with many Nevadans, are embarrassed to admit that Nevada is last when it comes to funding education. It does not have to continue to be this way. It can all change with your leadership to fully implement a plan to optimally fund Nevada's education system. I encourage you to put this funding plan, as prescribed by SB 439, into law. The time is now. Nevada children deserve this. As a veteran CCSD teacher and CCSD parent, I urge you to get this done. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 950. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Angie Joy, ANGIE JOYE. Thank you, Committee Chair Brooks and committee members. I am a teacher at Ann Lynch Elementary School. I teach 2nd grade, and I'm a member of the Clark County Education Association. I think it is important to reflect on the pandemic and how that highlighted some of the many problems in education. For example, our state has the largest class sizes in the nation, and that makes it hard for a typical classroom teacher. But on top of that, it makes it impossible for school counselors and psychologists to provide the services that children need. For most of the pandemic, all I've been hearing on the news is that people wanted schools to open back up for students' mental health. Though the Nevada plan attempted to address class size and mental health with categorical programs, those programs varied school to school, failing to provide needed resources to many students. I am in support of the full implementation of SB 543, the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan. This plan will ensure equitable access to proven academic and social-emotional support and other resources that our students drastically need. We need to make long-term investments into our education system. We have held off long enough, and now is the time to make the progressive change that is needed. For example, if we start funding now, In 10 years, we will be aligned with the national average. Every moment we delay puts us further and further behind. There are no gray areas anymore. Do you love children and want them to be successful in our school system? Fund this plan. Do you see our economy grow in the years to become because we have more skilled workers? Fund this plan. It is very simple. You are either in favor of moving us forward or you are determined to hold us back. Fund this plan. In 2019, when the Nevada Legislature passed SB 543, the intent was for them to fund the pupil-centered funding plan in the 2021 legislative session. However, at this point, no additional revenue has been proposed to fund the plan. By failing to fund SB 543, you are making it painfully clear that the work I do, that the students and families I serve, do not deserve any better than what they have today. Make the necessary changes today and fund the plan that delivers a future for our students and families and our state for tomorrow. We thoroughly appreciate the implementation mechanism of SB 439, and the time is now to commit to fully funding SB 543 as planned. It is time to stop being complacent with being last. Respectfully, Angie Joy.
Caller with the last three digits, 428. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Sherry Griggs, CHERIGRIGGS. I teach kindergarten at James B. McMillan Elementary School in Clark County, and I am a member of the Clark County Education Association. Thank you, Committee Chair Brooks and committee members, for allowing me to speak today. Since March 16th, 2020, I have been teaching kindergarten students virtually. I'm doing my level best to provide the same engaging curriculum that my students would be receiving sitting in my classroom. But we are doing it all online and without the benefit of cooperative and tactile learning. They are struggling. They do not have books at home to practice their developing reading skills. The parents aren't licensed teachers, but they try to assist the children through this learning process. Children with special needs and IEPs are really being left behind, even though teachers are trying to provide as many services as possible for these children. When our students return to the classroom, they will be academically and socially behind. Teachers and their schools will actively stand up to provide additional support for these children because that's what we do. I'm sure that you and your colleagues will hear from various experts who will advise you to pass this mandate or that mandate to correct this problem. Unfortunately, your mandates regularly have come without funding attached to it. I am in support of a complete implementation of SB 543, the People-Centered Funding Plan. This pandemic should have opened all of our eyes to just how fragile our educational funding is in Nevada. Our children deserve a properly funded public education from our state, but our state needs to stop relying on the casinos for this funding. It's time to diversify revenue streams, including increasing the contribution from mining, since their tax rate has not changed since 1863. Once corporations see that Nevada legislators take education seriously, they will be more willing to move operations here, thus further developing additional revenue for funding SB 543. Please fully and properly fund education here in Nevada by voting yes on SB 439. Enough is enough. Show the voters and the children of Nevada that you are serious about their education and that it is not just a re-election soundbite. Thank you very much for your time.
Caller with the last three digits, 438. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. Chairman Brooks, distinguished members of the committee, for the record, my name is Jim Frazee, Jimfrazee, and I'm a classroom educator in Clark County. I also have the honor of being vice president of TCEA. For over 16 years, I've had a front row seat to the devastating effects of underfunding public education. I have watched as 50 students tried to cram in a room with 35 desks. I have watched as my students work with books with no covers and missing pages. I have watched as my incredibly talented colleagues who were in the prime of their careers walk away from our occupation due to frustration and burnout. I'm done watching. At the start of the last legislative session, Governor Sisolak declared, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I'm here today to scream from the mountaintops that it is broke and we need to fix it, and we need to fix it now. It is time for a new and bold approach to public education in Nevada. The 2019 legislative session was the first step when SB 543 was passed. Now, as we discuss SB 439, the implementation of the student-centered funding plan, we must embrace the change to ensure the needs of our students are put first. Money should not be allocated to a school, but it should follow the student. That is why I support SB 439 and SB 543. In Clark County, around 81% of students that qualify for Zoom services do not receive them because they're not at a Zoom designated school. Parents should no longer have their child locked into a school and a zip code simply to get the extra resources they need to be successful. I urge you to support SB 439, but just as importantly, I also urge this committee to fund the student-centered funding plan in accordance with the Commission on School Funding to ensure that we invest in our students with the proper resources they need to succeed. I thank you for your time.
Caller with the last three digits, 947. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, and thank you, Chairman Brooks and committee members. My name is Kenny Belknap. That's KennyBelknap, and I'm a teacher at Del Sol Academy in Las Vegas, where I teach U.S. government, and I'm a proud CCEA member. This last school year has shown the deep systemic problems that are facing our education delivery system. Before the COVID-19 outbreak even began, our schools were stretched thin, almost to the point of breaking. We constantly had kids falling through the cracks, kids that stopped showing up or began failing all their classes, and we simply did not have the staff to support them the way that we wish that we could. Today, those cracks have caused the floor to fall out beneath us, and we see the ugliness that decades of neglect and underfunding has done to our schools. The workloads of our educators are too immense for us to provide the kind of one-on-one instruction or support our students desperately need. Our school psychologists' workloads of 2 and sometimes 3 schools do not allow them to provide counseling support to their students. Our counselors have so many students they're responsible for, they barely have enough time to do more than create schedules and conduct parent-teacher conferences. And our classroom teachers have so many students in their classrooms who cannot provide the proper support and one-on-one instruction that they also desperately need. These issues won't go away next school year just because we're back in the building. What you see with our schools today is the reality educators experience year after year. It's for these reasons I fully support it. I support a full implementation of SB 543, the pupil-centered funding plan. If we want to fix our education system, it must start by increasing the per-pupil funding level. Passing feel-good laws that set limits on our class sizes or workloads will not do anything to improve our system if they aren't supported by new funding. Increasing our per-pupil funding to just the national average over the next 10 years will allow us to decrease class sizes so kids can get more one-on-one instruction, decrease the workloads for our counselors and school psychologists so they can help our students' mental health, and ensure that there are strong EL programs at all schools, not just some, to help our students who are learning English succeed. The passage of SB 543 was celebrated last session as a watershed moment. It was long overdue that we modernize the archaic way that we distribute funds to our schools. We can't let that moment of excitement and promise for change to our students and our families be for nothing by walking it back now and choosing not to fund it optimally. We elected all of you and the governor to the state on the promise that you would all work to fix the education funding problem our state has faced for decades. You took the first step, but you cannot stop it there. If you do it, it will be exactly like all the promises of change made by our politicians in this state. Nothing more than a change in name only, and our students are left to struggle in a system all the adults know is broken. SB 439 is another step in the right direction, and we truly do appreciate putting the funding mechanism into law. But the time is now for funding our kids. You cannot allow another boom and bust cycle to come and go, and we change nothing. We elected you to lead. Now is your chance. Thank you for letting me speak.
We are currently on support testimony on Senate Bill 439. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in support, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no additional callers in support at this time.
Thank you. I believe we have somebody, I think we have Mr. Jeremy Aguero on the Zoom who would like to speak in support.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. This is Jeremy Aguero. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Certainly am supportive of this process as an ongoing evolution of SB 543, and certainly want to commend the Department of Education and legislators as they continue to work through the process and implement SB 543 and the pupil-centered funding program plan and all the elements that it has. So if there's questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, and certainly thankful to you, Mr. Chairman, and all the work of legislators to handle the business of the state, including the incredibly important elements of K through 12 education.
Thank you, Mr. Aguero. And this is a little bit out of order, but since Mr. Aguero was very, very involved and instrumental in 543 and the implementation, if any of the committee members have any questions on this bill or any of the 543 issues, he is available. Doesn't seem as if we do. Thank you, Mr. Aguero. Thank you for joining us. And I don't know if we have anyone else on Zoom in support. It does not appear that we do, so I will move to opposition of Senate Bill 439 here in the room.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks and the members of the committee. I'm Brian Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada State Education Association. 2 years ago, SB 543 was developed behind closed doors and wasn't introduced until the 99th day of session. We had but one single hearing on the bill, passing minutes before sine die. Today, on the 100th day of this session, SB 439 is receiving a hearing, but with less fanfare. But it was also developed behind closed doors, without even a preview of its content. The new funding formula will fail, because it was never built to succeed. Ever since the introduction of SB 543 2 years ago, NSEA has expressed policy concerns at every opportunity: the lack of educator voice, no new revenue, watering down Zoom and Victory schools, freezing and squeezing school district budgets, giving away a giveaway to charter schools, and undoing the rules of collective bargaining. SB 439 fails to address a single issue raised by educators, showing its backers are unserious about developing and delivering a funding plan to benefit all Nevada students. Nevada ranks 45th among the states in education funding, yet the new funding plan includes no new funding. While the Funding Commission recommended a 10-year plan for Nevada to increase education funding by $2 billion per year, SB 439 completely ignores these recommendations. Meanwhile, SB 439 further moves Nevada backwards by proposing to strike language in the NRS that references merit salary increases and cost of living adjustments. If the legislature is intent in moving forward with the implementation of this new funding formula, NSEA recommends making 3 changes to ensure that the new plan does significantly less harm to Nevada students and educators. First, grandfather existing Zoom and Victory schools located in Nevada's poorest communities, serving the highest percentage of at-risk students, and proven models of education equity. Second, hold districts truly harmless by using the greater of the 2020 total budget or per pupil amount by district, adjusted for inflationary costs of doing business. And finally, removing the anti-union language that increases district ending fund balances walled off from collective bargaining to 16.6% of annual operating costs. This will help preserve the collective bargaining process. Please listen to educators. Any trailing legislation that does not bring new revenue or address these serious policy concerns is doomed to fail Nevada's educators and its students.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association. 2 years ago, SB 543 was developed behind closed doors, wasn't introduced till the 99th day of the session, had but a single public hearing, and passed minutes before sine die. In my 30 years doing this work, SB 543 was one of the least transparent and least inclusive legislative efforts I've ever seen. But don't just take my word for it. When asked for their perspective on the process that produced SB 543, legislators in this building who actually voted for the bill had this to say, and I quote, "Unfortunately, the late introduction of SB 543 produced a process that legislators and stakeholders felt was not sufficiently transparent and inclusive." Quote, "I voted for it, although it had some language I thought would be problematic in its implementation." And I quote, "I would have liked to have seen greater discussion of the bill earlier in the session. It is a significant piece of legislation that impacts the entire state. We have been discussing changes to the funding formula for some time, so a more inclusive discussion of the bill would have been helpful." And I quote, "While I voted for SB 543, I had and still have some serious concerns about the methodology that underlies the budget formula. Regarding the legislative process, whenever possible, I believe that policy matters should be heard by policy committees before they are brought to money committees." And I quote, "I had hoped for a more robust and inclusive conversation about SB 543 prior to the last days of session, understanding that this is a complicated policy to take on." End quote. Nevada deserves a significantly more inclusive and transparent process on such a major policy shift, and we were promised our voices would be heard this session. Yet here we are with SB 439, developed behind closed doors, with no stakeholder input, or even a preview of its content this time. Introduced, guess what, on the 99th day of the session, with its first hearing today, only a day later. So it should come as no surprise. The three simple fixes requested by educators are nowhere to be found in this bill. Easy. One, grandfather existing Zoom and Victory schools. They are our model programs of education equity. Stakeholders in our communities of color and our BIPOC communities in Southern Nevada and in Northern Nevada are supportive of these programs, and you're dispensing with them. Two, hold districts truly harmless by using the greater of 2020 total budget or per pupil amount by district, adjusted by the inflationary cost of doing business. This is the freeze and squeeze, Chairman Brooks. Fix it. Three, remove anti-union ending fund balance language. This, quite possibly, is the most anti-union language compromising collective bargaining passed in any state since Scott Walker in Wisconsin. It's unconscionable, and people who claim to be supportive of workers and organized labor should be ashamed. Please, fix the bill. Thank you.
For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. I am the daughter of a mother who works for the Clark County School District at a Title I school. My mom sees the actual impact of the policies like this every day without any input on how they are created. We are in opposition to SB 439. This bill is not a fix that our educators or our kids need or deserve. This bill was developed without even a preview of its content or input from educators, as you have heard. SB 439 fails to address a single issue raised by educators, especially around Zoom and Victory schools, which we care deeply about, and the walling off of district-ending fund balances from collective bargaining. We ask you to oppose this bill and work with educators who do this work every day to implement the actual policies you pass that they have been begging for the past few sessions. We have been consistent on this issue. This is simply more of the same as when I went through the Clark County School District under the Nevada plan. That plan didn't work, and this is not a real fix either. This isn't bold legislation. To be clear, our organization is all for actual funding and actual fixes for education. I lived this issue firsthand in the Clark County School District as I sat on the floor in my French class in 9th grade at Centennial High School because we didn't have enough desks, or when we didn't have enough books for everyone in 11th grade. This isn't a bill that fixes that. Educators and our support staff deserve to be included in a real way in this conversation and all conversations around raising revenue and education funding this session. Thank you.
Good evening, Alexander Marks with the Nevada State Education Association. NSEA has participated in all 22 meetings of the Funding Commission. Chair McCormick even pointed out that NSEA has been nothing if not consistent about our opposition to Senate Bill 543. Unfortunately, despite our presence at all 22 meetings, active educators had no seat on that commission and were shut out of that process with none of the concerns being substantively addressed. For 2 years, educators have rallied outside of this very building, calling on our leaders to be brave and be bold. We began in 2019 under the banner Red for Ed, red symbolizing the financial hardships and struggles that our educators, as well as our public schools, face each day. We end 2021 under the banner of Red for Revenue because that is what is needed. We can build a bank, discuss how large that vault should be, but if it's empty, what did we really build? The approach that this state has taken has resulted in Nevada being 48th in the nation in education spending and 50th overall in chance of success index per the 2021 Quality Counts report. SB 543 and SB 439 will not change that issue. Unfortunately, despite the 4 rallies over the last 2 years, the testimony in every hearing with a microphone that's been turned on, the thousands of emails, including 300 just overnight before this hearing, engagement at all 22 funding commission meetings, SB 439 ignores the demands of teachers, education support professionals, other licensed professionals, parents, and community allies by failing to address a single issue raised in the last 2 years. NSEA has been urging you all to listen to educators for 100 days. We've asked for this bill to be fully funded. We've asked for an educator to be included on the commission. We've asked for Zoom and Victory schools to be grandfathered. We've asked for a true hold harmless to prevent a freeze and squeeze. We've asked to remove the anti-union end fund balance provision. In every single instance, nothing. Please know that our opposition comes from a good place as we are trying to make this plan work for all Nevada students and educators whose stories, many heartbreaking, we hear every single day about what is happening in our schools, in our school sites, and in our classrooms. We need a plan that works for all of them. That is all we are asking today and for the last 2 years. And as it stands, Senate Bill 439 fails in that effort, but it is not too late to listen to educators. Thank you.
Chairman Brooks, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Victor Salcido, and I am with the Charter School Association of Nevada. I want to thank each of you and the Funding Commission for all the work that has gone on over the last 2 years in an effort to transition from one funding formula to the next. Obviously, it's not an easy task, which is clearly one of the reasons it took over 50 years to get to this point. I want to thank Senator Dennis in particular for taking on a leadership role and undertaking this enormous challenge well over 2 years ago. I also want to thank members of the Joint Finance Subcommittee that met earlier this morning and voted unanimously to include public charter schools in the hold harmless provision as recommended by the Funding Commission, and voted that the hold harmless provision should fulfill its purpose by holding schools and districts actually harmless by basing it on a per pupil basis. In doing so, the legislature is keeping its word that this transition to a new funding formula would not hurt any child in Nevada's public system. I would agree with the conversation I heard here tonight and with NDE that it is appropriate to codify these points to avoid any possible confusion in the future. Unfortunately, we're here in opposition because while no school district or school will be harmed compared to the fiscal year 2020, the new pupil-centered funding plan does not treat all students equally. Public charter schools are still excluded from certain adjustments, such as the size adjustment that district-managed schools in the same counties receive. We believe all children in our public school system should be funded equally, taking into account geographic differences. That would truly be pupil-centered. Thank you for your time this evening, and thank you for your public service.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else in the audience in opposition to Senate Bill 439? 439. I don't see any, so we'll go to the phones. And if we could have anyone in opposition to Senate Bill 439 that is on the phone tonight, please broadcast. Will you please tee them up?
Thank you, Chair Brooks. To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 439, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 831. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Chair Brooks and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Cecia Alvarado, CECIA-ALVARADO. I'm the Nevada State Director for Mi Familia Vota, and I'm here testifying in opposition. This bill once again lacks the transparency. This bill was introduced last night, not giving us a chance to review, but most importantly, not giving us an opportunity to mobilize our community. Our community wants to be heard. For the past 2 years, Mi Familia Vota has mobilized students, community, parents to testify, to make their voices heard during committee hearings. Our community wants more student victory. Our community deserves the support, and they also deserve to be heard. Over 50,000 students had an opportunity for the middle class because of Victory and Zoom provided a structure that supported their learning needs. And once again, we're in front of you asking, grandfather into legislation the Zoom and Victory programs to ensure that they are preserved. Our communities want to see more Zoom and Victory schools, not less, because parents know that Zoom and Victory schools offer students better support. In these schools located in our lowest income zip codes, students do well. Zoom and Victory help the most vulnerable children who have attended our most neglected schools. After years of hard work, these schools, which previously had been failing schools, are being turned around. Victory and Zoom had pushed districts to focus on instructional systems and teachers' support that help teachers improve the quality of instruction. Mi Familia Vota once again opposes this bill, and we hope that in the next hearing we have the opportunity to make our communities be also present and make their voices heard. Thank you for your time.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 743. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening. My name is Philip Kaiser, PhillipKaiser. I'm a 20-year veteran teacher, the president of the Washoe Education Association. Governor Sisolak recently stated that even though the Funding Commission suggested raising revenue through a sales and property tax initiative in order to adequately fund education, there was simply not enough time to fully vet these proposals in the time remaining in the session, just over 20 days. Then a few days later, we see SB 439, which alters revenue streams, changes weights for some students in the new funding formula, redefines small school districts, creates a rainy day fund for education, adjusts support if the price of gold goes down, changes issues related to professional development. And if a student earns a weight for special ed, he can't earn a weight for English learner or if he's poor, but that requires funding. Because, see, now we have to rush through this new funding formula with no funding, even though we have only 20 days left. It doesn't make sense. Delay the implementation of SB 543, the 2019 new funding formula with no new funding. It frees the school districts at the 2020 level. It alters Zoom and Victory schools. It's an anti-collective bargaining ending fund balance. And really, the current July 1st implementation should be pushed back to fully consider the implications for all the schools and students in Nevada. Don't implement this funding formula without new funding. Nevada students need a long-term, sustainable funding stream. So delay the implementation until that is in place. Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 084. please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Chairman Brooks and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tom, T-O-M, Wellman, W-E-L-L-M-A-N, and I'm a resident of Assembly Senate District 1. I'm here this afternoon as an individual speaking in opposition to Senate Bill 439. This bill falls far short of addressing the education community's issues and concerns revolving around Senate Bill 543. SB 543 is an attempt to address the major funding crisis that is confronting public education in the state of Nevada. SB 439 is little more than a Band-Aid attempt to infuse the needed new revenue to make SB 543 work and benefit our schools. But it's not enough. I've called Nevada my home for over 42 years and worked for 32 years for the Clark County School District. I'm honestly tired of legislators that use public education as a soundbite for their campaign and never step up and address the funding issues for public education. This is not a new issue. It's been going on for years. Educators and students have been asked to do more for less for far too long. It's time to do the right thing and listen to educators that are on the front line dealing with our students on a daily basis. It's disappointing that educators were not included in the process of crafting SB 543, and when we dare to voice our concerns, we're basically told to sit down and behave and stop being disingenuous. It's time to do the right thing and listen to educators. AJR 1, number 1, could solve many of the problems that you're now facing regarding a strong funding stream for SB 533. Our students are watching. They deserve better than being labeled 48. You chose to run, now choose to lead. I stand in opposition to SB 439. Please do the right thing for our students. Thank you for your time.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 105. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. And may I please suggest that you mute your background sound so we can hear you better.
Andrea Morency, A-N-D-R-E-A-M-O-R-E-N-C-Y. Thank you, Committee Chair Brooks and Committee. I'm the Executive Director and Principal for the Honors Academy of Literature. We're a K-8 charter school located in downtown Reno, and we're in our 9th year of operation, servicing 230 students. We're opposed to SB 439 as we believe that there's an error in the funding model that excludes charter schools in the adjustment to the basic state per pupil funding, and needs to be addressed for it to be adequate and equitable for Nevada students. We want to recognize the committee and thank you for the per pupil hold harmless. That does take the immediate panic away from our ability to make our FY22 budget work. Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 740. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Stephen Horner, S-T-E-V-E-N-H-O-R-N-E-R. I reside in Assembly District 35 and Senate District 9. I am an Army veteran and a retired special education teacher from Clark County School District. And I am most proudly a grandfather of students in the Clark County Public Schools. I am speaking in opposition to SB 439. We have a shortage in Nevada, and it's growing rapidly. It's an educator shortage. 2 years ago, 543 passed without educators having a seat at the table. It did not fund education. It just moved money around, defunded programs that are working, and allowed school districts to hide 16% of the appropriated money so they don't have to pay their employees. It also led to a freeze and squeeze in the rural counties, the ultimate shell game. 439, again, does not fund education, then nor does it fix the elements of 543. It is going to lead to further shortages, especially at the at-risk schools and the rural districts. We've had this fight for generations in Nevada. We are 48th in the nation in per pupil spending, and we have some of the largest classrooms in the nation. And we are losing our young educators at lightning speed. And until we address the need for the adequate funding, then any bill that just shifts the funding is moot. I've heard for 30 years, we just don't have the money. Maybe next session. Well, it's time to address it and find new revenue streams, bringing Nevada from the 19th century to the 21st century. It is time to listen to educators and to step up and do what is right for all Nevada students and the future. Thank you for your attention, and please oppose 439, and support funding.
Caller with the last three digits, 358, please press *6 to unmute.
Good evening. My name is Ben Salko, BenSalkowe, and I'm the principal for Akipo Academy in East Las Vegas. Good evening, Chair Brooks, Chair Dennis, and members of the committee. I work at Akipo Academy with a college prep mission serving first-generation college students in the community that Senator Dennis represents. I want to thank you all for the work that you're putting into these school funding issues and the challenges in front of you today. I'm sincere when I say that my team's opposition to this bill is very targeted and very specific, and I hope you'll be able to move forward with changes to implement a truly pupil-centered funding plan. I worked in the Clark County School District as an educator and program leader for 8 years before I joined with our families and colleagues to open Akipo Academy. We wanted to make a public school in the 89110 zip code where a college diploma was a real and achievable goal for every student, regardless of their past grades, attendance, or behavior. With that spirit and a common set of beliefs and values, our team and our families have built a school and a warehouse that I'm so proud of. The first open enrollment 5-star public secondary school in East Las Vegas, and a public high school where every student earns an acceptance letter to a 4-year college or university. Our kids and families, over 800 of them, are doing this work each and every day in your district. The absence of Zoom funding in this bill would remove hundreds of thousands of dollars that currently support our teacher aides, instructional materials, and support personnel for newcomers and emergent bilingual students on our campus. We've proven at Akipo as a Zoom school that it's possible for someone to start school as a freshman just learning English, and for that same student to graduate 4 years later with a college acceptance letter and the skills to succeed there. We need you to grandfather Zoom and Victory programs to ensure this work continues. Likewise, the increased funding gap in this bill between different types of public schools, created by offering adjustments that are only given to central district offices and not independent public schools like ours, would create new inequities between inner-city public charter school students and selected magnet schools in more affluent suburbs. I want to ask simply that the urban-rural adjustment be made available to public charter schools as well as traditional district ones. I truly appreciate the discussion around the amendment to expand hold harmless for charter schools, and I'm optimistic that with some of these changes, our team and our school and our community would be fully in support of this plan with those changes. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 358, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Selena LaRue Hatch, LaRueHatch. I'm a teacher and member of NSBA and WEA, and I'm imploring you to make some critical adjustments to the new student-centered funding plan prior to full implementation. Under the current plan, almost all districts across the state, including my own, will be frozen at our current budgets for years to come. With the rising costs of living and inflation in my area, you are essentially cutting our budget for the foreseeable future. How can anyone think that implementing a new funding plan without any new funding is going to work? This is incredibly and willfully harmful to our children. As it stands right now, I am set to have class sizes of 40 or more next year. That equates to just 6 minutes of instructional time per student per week. And sadly, that is the norm across Nevada. My geography textbook lists 9/11 as a current event, and my world history textbooks talk about this new thing called the internet. How are we supposed to teach when our classrooms are overcrowded and our materials are out of date? And this proposal is not to fix these issues, but to make them worse. I think you have heard from the calls tonight that educators are frustrated, even ones in support of this plan. We are frustrated because we continue to be shut out entirely from this process, which will directly impact the quality of education we can provide to our students. For years now, we have sent letters, called into public comment, physically protested, and had one-on-one conversations with our elected leaders, and all of it seems to have fallen on deaf ears. You have ignored every request we have made to help make the new funding plan work. Why are you so intent on ignoring and alienating your educators? You must understand that every person has a breaking point, and educators are reaching ours. Continue to ignore us at your peril. And why push to this extreme? All of this pain can be easily avoided if you would just listen to educators for once. There are simple fixes to 543, which could bring all parties to the table and even positively impact education in Nevada. All we want is to grandfather in Zoom and Victory, adjust the hold harmless to account for increasing student enrollment and cost of doing business, and delete the anti-union ending fund balance language that allows districts to wall off 16.6% of their operating budget from collective bargaining. Please, for the sake of our students, listen to educators and enact these simple fixes to this plan. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 881, please press *6 to unmute. Caller with the last three digits, 881. You have raised your hand. Please press *6 to unmute. Thank you, caller with the last three digits, 881. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Yelsi Bahena, Yelsse, last name Bahena. Good evening, Chair Brooks and Chair Dennis and members of the committee. I am a high school teacher at Equipo Academy in East Las Vegas. Our community is most first-generation students. We have Spanish-speaking families. A lot of their families are immigrants. Although this bill will provide funding across many schools in the state, this bill furthers the education gap across Nevada, knowing that it excludes charter schools. First of all, it would take away funding that we use for teacher aides and emergent bilingual instruction. And when I started school in this country, I actually experienced firsthand the lack of resources for emergent bilingual students. And I understand how it can hinder students' learning. So if this bill is passed, it will further the achievement gap for this vulnerable population. And many of our bilingual emerging students have the potential and energy to further their opportunities through education. Additionally, students with special needs will be impacted as well, as this bill would limit the number of teacher aides. And schools like Equipo Academy would not be able to optimize those services that students highly depend on to be successful in their education. Next, this bill expands the funding gap between public charter schools and public CCSD schools. And during this committee meeting, words such as equity, equality, and improving the education system were constantly being mentioned. However, because this bill excludes charter schools, our education system in Nevada will continue to suffer from these inequities. And thank you for your time.
Caller with the last three digits, 367. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Ashley Perkins, ASHLEY PERKINS. I'm the administrator of the Elko Charter School, and we call in opposition to 439. We hear all the time about equity, and we've also heard that the previous funding formula was flawed. But here we are again looking at a bill that excludes specifically a group of students, which is the definition of inequality. Not including charter schools and the school size and location adjustment does just that. It creates an environment of inequality. If this passes as it is written, Nevada will lose many of its charter schools and school choice within Nevada. Please consider making revisions so that this bill is truly a bill of inequality, and we can show the rest of the state what we mean by we want to provide equality for all of the students of Nevada. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits, 983. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Chairman Brooks and other esteemed members of the committee. My name for the record is Emma Davis, EMMADAVIS. I have been an educator in Nevada for the last 9 years, the last 5 of which I have had the pleasure of calling Akipo Academy, a K-12 public charter in District 2 home. I stand in opposition with the wording and funding model in Senate Bill 439, which widens the funding gap between public charters and CCSD public schools, combined with cutting Zoom funding, which by the most recent estimate would ultimately result in a loss of hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding just for Akipo Academy alone. Akipo Academy shows clearly that there is a return on investment when a parity of funds goes to charter schools. Our last 3 graduating classes have had 100% college acceptance rates, many of whom, as you have heard from my colleagues, are first-generation college students. In 2019, we became the first 5-star middle school in East Las Vegas. Zoom funding has been essential in making all of these achievements happen. But the impact is not just in the numbers, it is in the students we are educating. If we genuinely want to treat students equitably in our state, it is worth remembering that our students are worth investing in regardless of where they attend school. We ask not for special treatment and funding. I urge you to grandfather in Zoom and Victory schools and ensure the same funding for students in public charters as students who attend magnet schools in the same area, so that we can continue educating our students and creating change in education so that students can see their dreams as realities. Thank you for your time.
Caller with the last three digits, 118. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
David Blodgett, Blodgett. Chair Dennis, Chair Brooks, members of the committee. I know there's a lot of people signed up to speak tonight, so I'm not going to repeat what's already been spoken. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that our colleagues from Akipo Academy have shared. But I want to speak about one specific issue that I believe is left out of SB 439. I'm a school leader of a diverse school where more than half of our students travel to school every day on a school bus. I reserve the right to correct myself if I'm wrong here, but after reading the 53 pages, I don't believe there's any mention of transportation funding for charter schools the same way that it exists for public school districts. Providing transportation is one of the most direct ways that we can increase equity and access to high quality public schools. And right now, without that transportation, I'm surprised that it's very rare among charter schools. At our school, we currently hire one driver for every roughly 100 of our students, and these funds come from our general operating budget. It's a significant investment, and I understand why more schools don't do it, because it requires us to make other difficult decisions. I'm encouraged to hear that we are working towards long-term sustainable structural improvements for equitable funding, but until charter school transportation is included, I feel like the bill falls short. Thank you.
We are currently in opposition testimony on Senate Bill 439. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 612, please press *6 to unmute. Caller with the last three digits, 612, please press *6 to unmute. No response. We will come back to you. Chair, at this time, there are no additional callers in opposition.
Thank you. So I will now move to those who want to provide testimony in the neutral position here in the committee room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Lindsay Anderson on behalf of the Washoe County School District. I know neutral testimony after 8 o'clock at night is probably not particularly popular, but I did just want to get on the record that the Washoe County School District supported the implementation of Senate Bill 543 last session. I think our neutral position at this point is because we're trying to process the information included in this bill and the decisions made by the subcommittee this morning to understand the full impact that these policies have on districts like Washoe. We know there's more work to be done. We certainly would like to continue to offer our technical expertise from our district as the recipients of these funds and those as the district who implements education with these funds. We want to continue to offer that expertise as we move forward with this implementation. And so we continue to want to work towards the full implementation where no district is in a hold harmless position. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else in the committee room in the neutral position? Okay, can we go to the phone lines and see if we have anyone who wants to provide testimony in the neutral position?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in neutral on Senate Bill 439, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 309. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Brian Rippett, Brian Rippet. I'm a chemistry and physics teacher in Douglas County, currently serving as the president of the Nevada State Education Association. First, I'd like to acknowledge the many good intentions of the committee and the legislators involved in this process. And I also want to state for the record my belief that the pupil-centered funding plan in concept is a great leap forward to meeting the needs of more Nevada students. Yet, I am here testifying in neutral. This is due to some continuing concerns with the revenue-driven model without any revenue. While I continue to believe in my heart that revenue will accompany the plan, time is running out to both fully implement and fully fund. Therefore, I wonder, how does the funding follow the student to a small school when the requirement that money spent at small schools has been removed? How did the current Zoom and Victory students overcome the loss of programs and the transferring of their educators when their funding guarantee has been dropped? How will the cost of housing be incorporated into the cost of doing business adjustment? Or will homes in Mineral County and continue to be assumed to be the same cost as homes in Washoe County? And also, how long will districts be frozen and how hard will they be squeezed without at least inflation?
We're currently in neutral
guaranteed?
testimony. I see what you did there, Mr. Rippets. Do we have anyone else in neutral?
These questions,
Do we have anyone
Caller
who's
with
in
the
neutral?
last three digits. Yes, sir. We have One more caller at this time. Caller with the last three digits, 021. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening. For the record, Rebecca Feiden. That's REBECCA FEIDEN. I serve as the Executive Director of Nevada State Public Charter School Authority. First, I want to appreciate the work of the Legislature, the Funding Commission, and the Nevada Department of Education for their efforts to modernize Nevada's school funding formula. I was also very encouraged by the action in the budget hearing this morning, recommending that charter schools be included in the hold harmless. This is critical to ensure the financial stability of our charter schools, and I would encourage this body to codify that change in the bill before you this evening. As you consider Senate Bill 439, I also want to provide some information about how this new formula would work for charter schools. Under the current Nevada plan, charter schools essentially receive the same per pupil funding as the local school district. The pupil-centered funding plan diverges from this premise. Under the pupil-centered funding plan, charter schools would receive the same statewide base funding and same weighted funding. However, charter schools would not receive the district equity adjustment, nor would charter schools receive the auxiliary services funding for transportation and food services. Specifically, based on a model provided by the Department of Education in November, we calculated that a charter school in Clark County would be funded at approximately 93% of the school district, in Washoe County, 92% of the school district, and in Elko County, 76% of the school district. So when fully implemented, the result will be that two students may go to school across the street from each other, one to a district school, one to a charter school, but be funded very differently. Again, the hold harmless will provide an important stopgap for a school that would otherwise see a decline in funding. For example, without the hold harmless, Learning Bridge Charter School in White Pine County would go from approximately $2.1 million in state revenue in fiscal year 20 to $1.4 million, a $700,000 decrease or 33% decrease in funding. Again, the hold harmless will prevent what would otherwise be a severe financial impact. I do have concerns about what will happen when the hold harmless sunsets, as the funding model does create some structural funding differences between charter and district schools, and I look forward to engaging with the department and legislature further to examine the potential long-term impact of this new funding model.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else in neutral on the phone?
Yes, sure. We have one more caller. Caller with the last three digits, 309. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes again.
Brian Rippick, continuing. These and other questions keep me neutral. It would otherwise be strong support for this significant process. We need real revenue. Full implementation requires full funding. So before we celebrate and congratulate each other, let's commit to full funding so Nevada's 500,000 students can get the education they deserve. Thank you.
That's persistence. I got to respect that. All right. That is the last caller that we have this evening. And thank you, Broadcast, for facilitating that for us. So now, committee, we can, now that we're through with testimony, we want to move into a work session on Senate Bill 439. And Mr. Thorley, if you could walk us through that.
Senate Bill 439 was heard by the committee today. It revises various statutes in order to implement the pupil-centered funding plan. The bill clarifies various statutes relating to education funding, including the addition of additional revenue sources in the state education fund, the exclusion of interest earned on general fund appropriations to the state education fund, the elimination to fund the State Board of Education and Nevada Department of Education from the State Education Fund, the elimination of the special education weight from the pupil-centered funding plan, a change to the adjustment factor for small schools or school districts, a change to the school district ending fund balance calculation that would trigger a transfer to the education stabilization account, a change to various reporting requirements, the transfer of the National School Lunch Program to the Department of Agriculture, and the elimination of various accounts relating to education. Previous question from the committee today regarding the possible inclusion of language in the bill related to hold harmless for charter schools and calculating the hold harmless amount based on per pupil. In consultation with legal staff, those recommendations, if approved by the full money committee on Saturday, will be included in the K-12 education funding bill back language. There are two proposed amendments to Senate Bill 439. The first amendment, there's a mock-up on Nellis. This amendment proposes to change the timing of any transfers from the state education fund to the education stabilization account. Under current law, if there's excess money in the state education fund at the end of the fiscal year, that triggers a transfer to the education stabilization account. The proposed amendment would change that from an annual transfer to once a biennium. So at the end of each odd-numbered fiscal year, it would trigger a transfer to the education stabilization account. Again, that mock-up is on Nellis. Second proposed amendment is a conceptual amendment from the Department of Education and Governor's Finance Office related again to the education stabilization account. Under current law, the education stabilization account can only be accessed if revenue received by in the state education fund is 97% or less than what was authorized. The proposed amendment would add an additional condition for access to the state the education stabilization account related to enrollment increase. It would allow the education stabilization account to be accessed, funding in the account to be accessed if enrollment, actual enrollment increases beyond the enrollment projections included in the budget, and that would be upon approval of the Interim Finance Committee. In other words, the Interim Finance Committee would have to approve the revenue transfer from the Education Stabilization Account to the State Education Fund related to an increase in enrollment beyond what was projected. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee might have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Thorley. Do we have any questions from the committee? Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. In talking about the access to the stabilization account, and you said enrollment, I think I saw in the bill that enrollment counts are done 4 times a year. So can they access that if during a year it exceeds whatever the projection was, or is that 1 time a year?
We have the Department of Education who might be able to answer that question as well. Superintendent Ebert.
Heidi Hartz for the record. Generally speaking, the Department of Education identifies shortfalls in revenues attributed to changes in enrollment growth following the 3rd quarter of each school year. While that has been the historical practice, certainly it would be difficult to project if there would be a situation during which enrollment would grow at such an exponential rate that was not included in the legislatively approved budget that would require the department to come back more than once in each fiscal year to request a transfer of funds from the education stabilization account.
Can I continue? So thank you. And just, so it sounds like maybe you're going to look at enrollment 1 time a year, or maybe in the 2nd year of the biennium to consider whether you need more funding. And is it any enrollment over projections, or a certain factor of enrollment? If you're 5% over, or you're 3% over, or 10% over, what's your expectation as far as what would trigger access to the stabilization account?
Heidi Hartz for the record. Within existing statutes, the Department of Education collects average daily enrollment information on a quarterly basis, and payments to school districts and charter schools are revised for each quarter based on that actual data. The Department of Education tracks enrollment versus payments throughout each fiscal year. So in the event that enrollment grew at a rate greater than what was anticipated in the legislatively approved budget, and revenues were not being earned at a rate greater than the amount included in the legislatively approved budget, then it would be, this amendment would allow the Department of Education to go to the Interim Finance Committee to request a transfer from the Education Stabilization Account.
Thank you. So it sounds like there's not a minimum. It's just probably at the discretion of the department if they think they need to access more money to provide that to the districts. Is that what I'm hearing?
Heidi Hartz, for the record, that is correct. Again, if revenues are being earned exactly as projected in the legislatively approved budget, but the enrollment growth is even 1 or 2 students higher than the legislatively approved budget, then there exists the possibility that the Department of Education would not have sufficient funds available in the pupil-centered funding plan or the state education fund in order to accommodate the quarterly payments due to school districts based on that enrollment growth. Again, that example is very extreme to keep the conversation as simple as possible.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Senator?
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I just feel like that's extremely broad. I mean, there's kind of a lot of thresholds. 1% over, it's 2% over, it's 0.5% over. They can go back, and I don't know that the department would do that because using their discretion, I would assume it wouldn't be for 1 or 2 students. But that's the way it's been presented. It's pretty broad. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Hartz. Do we have any other questions from the committee on the work session documents? All right. I would entertain a motion to amend and do pass Senate Bill 439. I have a motion to amend, do pass from Senator Dennis, a second from Senator Cannizzaro. Any discussion on that motion? Senator Kiekhaefer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. My concerns more are with what's not in the bill, right? I think that, as we heard from Mr. Thorley, the provisions relating to hold harmless for charters and how they're calculated on a per pupil basis will be included in the education funding bill, I think is what he'd indicated. That's session law, right? That sort of expires as the bill expires. And usually we try to immortalize things that we care about in statute. So I would prefer that they be in the bill. But what is being proposed or what's left, I don't necessarily have any problems with. So I'm happy to support the motion. But I do think that as we go forward, perhaps we could find a place to get some of those items addressed in statute rather than in session law. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Gocochea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, it's no secret I have problems with 543, and I'm going to vote no on this bill until I have more time to really look at it, and hopefully I can get there when it comes to the floor.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Sievers-Gansert?
I'm going to support the motion tonight, but I'm going to reserve my right because I want to see the final language, and I do think there's some outstanding issues, and I do agree with my colleague Senator Kiekhaefer around the language and putting it actually in this vehicle versus back language, because we know that moves around session to session sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on that discussion, I know one of the things is we have to stand up the budget and then it will be able to continue on. So maybe some of this is going to be addressed because we don't have to make these decisions every time. It'll be able to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And we have a motion and a second, and we are in discussion on the motion. Do we have any other discussion on the motion from the committee? All right. So with that, all in favor, aye. All opposed, nay.
Nay.
And we have opposed from Senator Gocochea. And so the motion passes, and that is it for the work session on Senate Bill 439, and that will take us to our last item for the evening, which is public comment. And I want to remind the callers that we've been limiting comment in general to 2 minutes each, and that the opportunity to discuss and support testimony and support in opposition or in neutral of the bill that we heard this evening has come and gone, and this is public comment. So, broadcast, could you open up the lines and see if we have anyone in public comment?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Brooks. We are currently on public comment. If you have joined the call and would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 358, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Selena LaRue Hatch, LA_RUEHATCH. I'm calling again as a teacher and a member of NSCA and WEA, and I'm calling to urge the members of this body to support AJR 1. As you heard in many calls tonight, this measure is so long overdue and clearly popular with Nevadans, as evidenced by the thousands of emails, hundreds of protesters, hours of public comment, and overwhelming polling results you have all received since its introduction last summer. And of course, it is popular. The mines in Nevada make a fortune from our resources while paying a pittance in taxes to support the state that makes those profits possible. It is time they start paying their fair share in this state just like the rest of us. We are in a time of crisis, a time which has demanded sacrifice. Healthcare workers, educators, and essential workers have sacrificed their lives and their health in order to keep our communities safe and functioning. We are simply asking that mining corporations share in that sacrifice to keep our state healthy. If we can sacrifice our health and our safety, it seems a small ask that mining corporations sacrifice a minuscule portion of their record profits in order to fund the vital community services of education and healthcare. In this state, we are too often quick to cut our most essential community programs, but slow to ask the mega rich to chip in even a small amount. Education cuts are second nature, mining tax is foreign. This is wrong, this is backwards, this is harmful. It's time to abandon those devastating budget balancing measures of the past, seek a new path in which all Nevadans are doing their part to improve the state. If we are moving to a new funding plan, we need funding to support that. HAR 1 is the first step in that process. And if you are certain you are moving forward with this plan, then you need to listen to the recommendations of the Commission on Funding and raise new revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Thank you, Chair. Caller with the last 3 digits, 157. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Before you start my time, I wanted to testify in opposition and was unable to star 9 into the conversation. I know that Senator Brooks asked that we not do that, but I'm asking reconsideration.
I will, and I'll start your time right now, and I'm sorry you weren't able to get on.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it very much. Good evening. For the record, my name is Susan Kaiser, Kaiser. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher with a BS in Biology from UNR and a Master of Arts in Teaching. I taught science for 25 years, and I'm a proud member of NSEA. I am asking you to listen to educators, and I am speaking against SB 439. Scientists are trained to communicate and share their thinking and results to grow the body of knowledge we call science. A scientist must have an open mind and a willingness to ask hard questions, conduct experiments, and then look closely at their results to infer what may not be directly observable. Sometimes what is believed to be a fact is turned upside down when new technology reveals more evidence. Then science experts revise their thinking and even gracefully accept being wrong. Let's look at an example from history. Galileo is the father of astronomy and also made many important contributions to our scientific understanding. He was an expert. When Galileo's own observations confirmed Copernicus' heliocentric theory of the universe, trouble began. He was accused of heresy by the all-powerful Catholic Church because his theory contradicted the biblical text. Galileo survived the Inquisition but was forced to recant. However, these actions did not change the fact that the Earth orbits the sun. Today's educators are the experts on Nevada's classrooms. Daily, they work with students under difficult circumstances. These professionals have specialized training and conduct their own research. These educators have sent a loud message in letters, via public comment, and even organized the first Lobby Day event at the 2021 Nevada Legislature. They cite data from multiple reliable sources showing the critical funding shortages in our schools. Sadly, the education experts' message has been falling on deaf ears. It is time to open your eyes and ears to these hard facts. Listen to educators. We are the experts, and our input should be valued. I urge you to oppose SB 439, and thank you, Senator Brooks, for allowing me to speak after my hour-and-a-half wait. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next caller, please.
Thank you, Chair. We are currently in public comment. If you have recently joined the call and would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no additional public comment callers at this time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so with that, we can adjourn this meeting.